This is Josh Ward of the Sports Animal joining us right now. Josh, let's talk about the spring game a little bit. 2 days away. What can we expect? What should we look for when watching the spring game? Because I know Heupel, he's pretty cagey on what he tries to reveal to the public.
Yeah, sure. As most coaches are, and I get it at this point, I think you look at individual players and you might look at connections, like see what Joe Milton and Nico are able to do connecting with receivers. But making too much of overall team performance is something that we have to be careful about in projecting what it means for the upcoming fall. Let's see who is available, who's held out. When Cooper Mays was not out there for the first scrimmage a couple of weeks ago, I immediately was hesitant to talk too much about what it meant for offensive issues or the defensive impact because Cooper is so important at center for Tennessee, and they're still trying to figure out right tackle. But if you see some receivers who we expect to play this fall make some plays, that's a good indication. Or even a newcomer, a freshman, with so many freshmen who are on campus, you'll be able to see at least some of that physical ability that they have. It may not say exactly what their role will be, but if Arion Carter goes out there and makes some plays, I think that is a reminder of his ability and how he might be able to help either right away this fall or at some point. I think he can be a high-impact special teams player. So don't make too much of it for what it will say about the win-loss record or even what starting units will be, depending on who else is or is not out there. But you can still watch the players individually. This is the last look at football we get for college football, at least for the next 4 months. So I'm not going to tell people don't make anything of it. I don't think that is right at all. Just don't make too much of the good or the bad coming out of the game. And there will be some players that make some plays that realistically will not factor into what Tennessee will do this year.
Recapping the whole spring, I remember the first week or so hearing the defense was a little bit ahead of the offense, and I know that traditionally, that's usually what you want to see. Does that rule still apply? And did it apply to Tennessee throughout all the spring practice? The defense being ahead of the offense.
Well, it definitely did after the first scrimmage, but again, that was without Cooper, and within that, we heard the quarterbacks took care of the football, which I thought was important, especially when you have a freshman going through his first scrimmage action like Nico. That would be an easy spot to make some mistakes if the defense is able to get pressure and make some plays. So you can take the good and the bad from either side of that. We'll see this Saturday, depending on what the matchups are. But I have no hesitation in saying that this offense will be just fine this fall. As good as last year, that's an unfair expectation. But one of the best in the SEC, which would turn into one of the best in the country, I have no doubt there. But you can also look within the offense. Right tackle, that's a big deal. Replacing Darnell Wright is a huge task. Replacing him is nearly impossible. Playing well enough to continue succeeding is realistic. Left guard is a big deal. I thought Jerome Carvin was an important player for Tennessee the last couple of seasons, and he is gone, and there is talent to help at left guard. I think, Caleb, last week on the show we were talking about Addison Nichols. He's a young, talented player who could help at guard or as a backup at center to Cooper Mays. So he would be an individual player to watch out there. Vyson Lang is a newcomer that you can watch out there on the field at the Orange and White game. So that would be an example of trying to figure out some of the key pieces that will play a role in what the offense is this fall. But the offense versus the defense, maybe some individual matchups, but I'm more curious on the defensive side of just how some guys look, how Jordan Matthews or Ricky Gibson in the secondary look, or some of those linebackers I mentioned. Plus, some older players like Keenan Peely. He's going to be a high-impact player at linebacker as a transfer from BYU. Same for his former teammate at BYU, now at Tennessee, Gabe Judy-Lawley at corner.
Yeah, I'm putting a lot of money on if I were to bet, I would parlay the idea that Gabe Judy-Lawley and either Jordan Matthews or Ricky Travis will both be starting this year in the secondary.
Yeah, either at the start of the season or as the season goes along. Competition at safety is there, and I'm skeptical that they're going to count on a freshman right away in the secondary, considering the amount of veterans they have coming back. Just coaches, they know what they have with those guys. But if they make mistakes, if they continue to show some of the issues they have the last couple of seasons, and trust is gained by Matthews or Gibson or somebody else. John Slaughter's a guy they've talked about since he arrived. If one of those guys emerges, Christian Conyer, it's a deep group of freshman corners and defensive backs who came in competing to play right away. There are a lot of guys, and not everybody will stay. You know, somebody could enter the transfer portal after the spring thinking, okay, I might not get my chance. But Danico Slaughter at corner seems like a really good chance to be a starter. Gabe has a chance to be a starter, I think, for sure right away. Warren Burrell's going to have something to say there. Missed a lot of time this past season. Has still been limited coming back, but I imagine he'll compete for a starting spot. But that's the good thing. They have a lot of young, talented players who are legitimately pushing and trying to learn, and having them on campus for the spring semester gives them a more realistic shot of playing. But they have more real competition. They had some last year, but probably just not enough guys that were ready to play. They have more guys that could realistically be ready to play to compete in August.
Speaking of the portal, you brought up, Mr. Jones has a really good question about, with the portal about to open again, do you think Tennessee will try to add another quarterback or somebody at any other position in the next round of the transfer portal?
Yeah, I would think so. I don't think that there will be a ton of activity, but Tennessee has 2 scholarship quarterbacks. So they have to look at the portal and see what might be available. Now, it would not be a player coming in to compete to start right away. That's Joe Milton. And if it's not Milton, it's Nico. And every quarterback that's in the portal will know that. They've had Gaston Moore, who was the backup at the end of last season. So he's a high quality player who's been a walk-on for Tennessee at that position. But even if they had 3 scholarship quarterbacks, I'd say that's cutting it close considering the history Tennessee has dealt with. So I would look for a quarterback in the portal, but that doesn't mean you're going to find a guy that's highly acclaimed. I think a better spot would be a veteran quarterback who maybe at one point was highly touted, maybe not sure, but a guy who understands what his role would be, but has enough experience to where if you did need him, that you might be able to count on him and have some trust there versus a freshman that you're hoping to develop that maybe is not that highly touted and wouldn't necessarily fit into your future on the field and also would not be able to help if needed. A veteran who would have a better understanding of what his role would be is what I would be looking for if I'm Josh Heupel.
Wow, you're giving me with that major Keller Christ vibes. Remember with Jeremy Pruitt?
Yeah, and I think there's some value. Like you keep expectations realistic there and what the impact would be. But another example would be a player that once committed to Tennessee. Hunter Johnson was a 5-star quarterback who went to Clemson. Then Trevor Lawrence showed up, and Hunter realizes, wait a minute, this guy is something. So he went to Northwestern. Didn't exactly work out there. Was an older player, went back to Clemson, and understood what his role was when he went there. So somebody like that. And every once in a while you bring in that kind of player and he ends up being a lot better than expected. Another example would be Gardner Minshew, who ended up going to Washington State to be the starter. Now he's a backup in the NFL. But once upon a time, he planned to just go to Alabama as a backup quarterback. And, that kind of would be really valuable to a team because you never know if you're going to need him. But just about every team in the SEC needed their backup at some point last season, which means the number 3 guy became the backup. And Tennessee was down to a walk-on in the backup role this past season. So Tennessee fans have too much experience seeing number 2 and sometimes number 3 at quarterback. Josh Dobbs was needed when he came in as a freshman as QB4. 3 guys got hurt, and Josh Dobbs was needed, and that burned his red shirt in 2013. So just having 2 scholarship quarterbacks or 2 guys you can count on. And this is not knowing exactly what Tennessee thinks of Gaston Moore if he were needed. But let's say that they had some trust in him. I would still want another quarterback to add to the roster.